industrial locomotives and so the more offbeat prototypes have always been something that kit builders and the slightly odder modelers like myself really get into. And we're supported by many smaller businesses who are producing just the sort of thing we're looking for. And today I'm talking to Stephen and James from Planet Industrials, who produce the sort of range of kits I look at and think, oh, I'd like to build one of those, with a really wide variety of interesting prototypes for the industrial modeler. Hi, Stephen and James.
Hi, Phil. Good to see you again.
Right now, Planet Industrials, really, can you give us a bit of background? Because obviously a lot of our sort of viewers aren't going to be that familiar with you. Can you give us a background? Tell us where you came from and what you were aiming to achieve.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Planet Industrials have been running for almost a year now. We started really at Worley last year, 2019, and it's grown out of a business I started about 10 years ago now called Narrow Planet.
Yes, now Narrow Planet have really become a bit of a one-stop shop for the narrow gauge modeler, haven't they?
Yeah, so that came about really when I got back into modelling after the usual break in my sort of 20s and 30s, and just looking at what was on the market at that time. And the thing that we particularly started in was custom etching, because we found that we go to shows and an 009 loco would have like a huge standard gauge nameplate on the side of it. And it's like, okay, we can improve that. So we started that service, and the intention was always to move into kits and also to support other small producers in what they were doing. And in fact, James first came to us as a customer, so we did custom etching for James, and he was very interested in kit design as well. So he said, okay, James, why don't you try come up with something that will go on a ready-to-run chassis, which has always been, I guess, the ethos of Narrow Planet is to have a simple, fairly easy to construct, well-detailed body on a ready-to-run chassis. So a modeler can put it together without too much skill, but they can also use the skills they have to really detail and make it look great. And then that's kind of grown over the years. And then we got to thinking, well, how about we try and apply this this philosophy to standard gauge, because industrial standard gauge is a very core area of interest for us. And no one at the time we saw was really doing the same sort of combination of mixed media kits as we were doing in narrow gauge. So give that a go. That worked really well with the Ruston, the Planet we released at the end of last year, and it's kind of grown since then. And we're just kind of pushing that forward with new ideas all the time.
So
yeah, I think it's also worth mentioning about, I suppose, why industrial, isn't it, Steve?
I was going to say, what really attracted you to the industrial world? It's there is a growing band there, but I get the feeling that it's not a case of you saying, hey, there's a commercial opportunity here. You actually really love this stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely come from a personal interest, and all the stuff we've done through Narrow Planet, if we didn't want it ourselves, we didn't do it. And we're kind of taking that forward through this. And industrial, I think the industrial and narrow gauge spaces overlap quite nicely as well, because they're very, like I said earlier, they've got that esoteric quality to them. And also you can do very credible freelance modeling without being kind of stuck to the big four necessarily, because industrial lines are all quite unique, quite different. So you can take kind of products off the shelf in some cases and then make them your own in a way that you can't really do if you're modeling a Great Western. If that's your area of interest, and that's something that really resonates for us, and the smaller, quirky stuff.
Yeah, and I think it goes further and deeper than that, doesn't it? For both of us to some extent. I think my earliest memories of steam engines are going to my dad's hometown of Bristol, down to the docks at the Harbour Dock Railway, and seeing Hembury, the Peckett, and having rides in the GWR Toad brake van up and down. And then summer holidays I spent down there, I used to peek through the gates into Western Fuel Co and see the sort of the big yellow diesel, which was obviously I think a Hudswell Clark looking back. But I think that feel of tracks inlaid into the road, overgrown sidings, industrial wagons obviously got under the skin at a very early stage, and so throughout my modelling, personal modelling, it's always sort of been there in the background. And as Steve said, it just felt like a natural place to go after the years of working in narrow gauge. It felt like the opportunity was there with doing something in the industrial space. And I think we were chatting, weren't we, last week, Steve, about you know, I live in North Wales, and within sort of 10 miles of my home, I live in the middle of nowhere, but within 10 miles, there was a gasworks, there was a brickworks, and there was a coal mine, and all had small industrial systems with all sorts of different prototype steam engines running. So I think that breadth gives, you know, modelers the opportunity to do some really good fine scale modeling, but perhaps with their own sort of bent on it, that creativity.
I think this is it. I think that's possibly why industrial modelling has always, certainly has appealed to me. It is different. I sort of grew up, my exhibition world started in the 1980s, very late 1980s, when you couldn't move the Great Western Branch lines, if I'm honest, on the exhibition circuit. And yeah. I just looked at that and thought, that's not really me. And I suddenly found all these really weird shaped things there, and very interesting locomotives. Which I think ties in very nicely with what you guys are doing. Yeah.
The other advantage with the industrial scene as well is that you can get a lot into a small space, and obviously you can do that like selectively with mainline, but you can potentially model a whole facility in, you know, the very modest spaces that a lot of modelers have available.
I think the thing is that there's a lot of you can work in a very small space, which saves you time, because there isn't you have to do a lot of modeling for an industrial for an industrial setting. I think there's a lot of buildings to you can't just get away with throwing an awful lot of grass around and there you are, you've covered half your baseboard. So I mean, basically the company is moving on, and I believe you have a bit of an announcement for us.
Yeah, that's right. So we obviously have been a kit manufacturer, sort of component producer for a long time, specialised in that kind of thing. But we're actually, and it's something we've been talking about for a few years, and we've had a few attempts at it, and this is the one that's now coming together, is that we're going to be doing a ready-to-run loco in 00 gauge.
That's a heck of a leap to go from kit manufacturing to producing a ready-to-run locomotive. And would I be guessing there's a bit of a sneak preview on the screen behind James?
That's right, there is, yeah.
And
yes,
go on then, better tell us.
So the loco we've chosen is the Kerr Stuart Victory, which is a 6-coupled side tank. It was built during the First World War, and James has got some more detail about the loco itself.
Yeah, it's an interesting prototype, actually. I think obviously most people associate the Hunslet austerity saddle tank with the First World War sort of ROD manufacture, but the Inland Waterways and Docks Department was involved in supplying equipment and supplies to the front line, to the Allied forces in Europe. And over time, ports got congested. A new port was built at Richborough in Kent. And as part of that and the sort of move towards roll-on, roll-off transportation, the order was placed with Kerr Stuart for 10 of these, what were called Victory class side tanks. Not only were they, I suppose, similar in power and weight and size to the austerities, they're actually of the mainline standard of the time inside Stephenson link motion. Outside cylinders, compact and powerful. All 10 were delivered and saw action during the war. Several went over to France, I believe. But after the war, all 10 were then sold on. 6 went straight into industry, and then the others went off to sort of smaller lines, including the Brecon and Merthyr and the East Kent. But funnily enough, they actually all end up doing the same thing, really, hauling coal throughout their lives. A couple of them ended up on BR's books at nationalisation, but the 6 industrials lasted the longest. I think the last working example was Francis at Astley Green, lasted until 1968, and the last extent example was one of the South Wales ones that was cut up in 1969 by the NCB. So these were locos that saw service during the war, industrial service after the war across the whole country, and so it's an interesting chunky prototype, and it's something that perhaps people can use in whatever industrial setting they like, and it's something that Steve and I just were instantly drawn to. I don't know why. It was just a really nice looking locomotive.
I'll give you that, certainly. I mean, it's it's got that short wheelbase, large locomotive look that is so important with industrials, where essentially you need a lot of haulage, but you haven't got those lovely mainline curves to deal with to make life easier. It's also, I mean, it strikes me as a very sensible commercial decision, in the sense that you can use this anywhere. I'm guessing that there's plenty of livery potential. There's going to be a lot of modelers out there who are going to say, well, I'm doing something coal-based, I'm having one of those. And let's be honest, it's an attractive logo. I mean, where do you start with this sort of thing? I mean, I can understand that if you're one of the big manufacturers, this is pretty much what you do. For you guys, this was a big leap. I mean, where's it being made? How do you start with this sort of process?
Sure. So yeah, like as I said, we've thought about this a few times over, I'd say, the last 5 or 6 years, and primarily we're thinking narrow gauge 009 to begin with. Obviously, that market's changed a lot in the last couple of years as well, with the entrance of Bachmann and Helian, with their models. And we were thinking as well, how we would make it work, how we would fund it, and we thought about crowdfunding to start with. And obviously, there's been developments in that field that maybe made it wasn't the best decision. But the thing that really kind of got us going was our relationship with Minerva Models, who've done the Victory in 7mm scale, and we had a relationship with them through our custom etch service. In fact, we started talking to them about, could they help us to get started? Could they, talk to us about suppliers and pricing and all that? And I think at the time, I actually just bought one of the 7mm locos, and I mentioned to Chris Klein that, hey, that looks great. I'd love a 4mm one. And he actually said, oh, well, we priced it in 4mm and we didn't go forward with it. So if you're interested, we can talk to you about that. So that's where we've come from. And Chris, who sadly passed away earlier in the year, and Chris Baston, who's the other partner in Minerva, incredibly helpful in making that introduction to the supplier, and helping us here with the quote and the review process of the design. So really, it's with their assistance, and we owe them great debt that we've been able to move this forward. But it's actually put us in a strong position where we're going now directly to the manufacturer. So we have that close relationship. We're not reliant on another party. So it's kind of in our control. And it is definitely a learning process for us. And there's still a lot to discover of how this works. But we think that with the 10 years of background from Narrow Planet, we kind of know more or less what we're doing, and hopefully we can deliver it successfully.
I did wonder actually if there was a Minerva connection, obviously because of the O-gauge model, and also because both Chris's, and I say Chris Klein is a great loss, but they are behind the scenes. They have done an awful lot to help other businesses. They are an absolute powerhouse and a source of knowledge. I've enjoyed many chats with them, and I can imagine that working with them has always been an absolute pleasure. Yeah,
no, it really has, and the help they've given us has been invaluable, really.
And I think I think honestly that they will want to see you succeed with this. This is a big step. I'm guessing that the finance was challenging. Certainly, dealing with China directly, I can imagine, is challenging. It's a very new area, but you've leapt in there. Can you tell us a bit about the model that we're gonna be seeing specifications, and obviously everybody's sitting there wanting to know, when can I buy one and how much is it going to cost?
Yeah, I'll kick off with that. Well, obviously it's an injection molded plastic model with lots of separately applied details, die-cast chassis, 5-pole high torque motor. We've gone for a 40-to-1 gearbox. I think one thing I've noticed in the past is industrial models sometimes have a sort of an East Coast mainline racehorse performance. We were keen on something that's that actually ran like an industrial model and was capable of slow speed. So high torque motor with a flywheel and a gearbox ratio to match. So you're looking at about a 45 miles per hour scale speed top out. I think we're looking at 3 to 4 colorways at the minute. It's something Steve and I have been chatting around. We'd obviously like to do them all. And the more you research, the more you find out. You're like, oh, that's an interesting variation. But I think we're going to narrow it down and stick with 3 or 4 basic colours, and then look at the sort of lining and lettering options as well.
So when are we like to start seeing this?
So we're previewing Sorry. So we're previewing the CAD design at the moment.
Yeah.
That's been approved. We started tooling. So we're looking hopefully at engineering prototypes, in the early part of next year, with an ultimate delivery. I mean, we're looking potentially at autumn next year. Obviously, we don't want to promise that at this point, because not only is the process always more difficult than you expect, but we're in an unprecedented global situation as well. So until we really know more, we're not going to be firm on that. But that's the kind of timescale we're looking at.
And so we need to look out for announcements about price and everything nearer the time, once you've pinned everything down.
Yeah, I mean, I think the price we're fairly set on for the Loco. It's going to be, I think we're going to look at £130 for the model. What we're going to do though is we're going to have a pre-order scheme, so there'll be a discounted price if you pre-order, just to kind of help drive the interest and get people on board with it. But we'll be announcing details of that probably later in the year.
Excellent. I shall certainly be looking forward to that one, because I must admit I've looked at the 7mm Victory a few times and thought that's a really nice looking Loco. But no, Phil, you must not buy more. You must not buy O-gauge trains. You've got enough trains out there.
Yeah.
But I think most of us are quite like that. Well, I mean, obviously, first thing, good luck with this process. We look forward to hearing more about it, and certainly it's a brave move, and I think one that's going to be welcomed by a lot of modelers.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, we're looking forward to delivering it.
Right, now, just time for a few quick-fire questions for the two of you. We're asking everybody, what's your favourite exhibition breakfast? Come on, James.
I'd say I'm very bad timekeeping, so I'm usually there too late for breakfast, unfortunately.
Yeah, if I get there in time, then I'd be after a bacon and egg bap, definitely, and a good strong coffee, usually first thing.
Excellent. Right, do either of you have a favourite layout that you've seen at a show? What's stuck in your mind?
Well, that's a good question. For me, Gordon and Maggie Gravitt's Pempool, I think the French meter gauge layouts. It just the quality of the scenic modelling seen in the flesh just blew me away. There's been plenty of other layouts that you go, that's got something special, but there was something artistic about it as well, and I think that's what did it for me. It wasn't just the prototype as such, it was the way it's presented, it was the quality of the modelling, just absolutely fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, Pempool definitely a very strong choice. I think also, most recently I've been really inspired by Ollie Turner and Chris Matthews' layouts. I think 6 Quarters was a PB layout, and they've done a Northern Electric one since then as well, which is, and just the kind of the tones and the kind of industrial scene that they created is just it's part of the reason why we want to do this, because we can see kind of the results you can get from
both really sort of whole scene layouts there. And perhaps certainly Pempool, not the obvious choice for people with an industrial background, but very much. It's. I know exactly what you mean with Pempool. It's not a prototype I have any interest in, but the modelling is astonishing, and I do just look at it and think that's beautiful. Anyway,
and the Gravitts have subsequently done Aaron Key as well, which is again is just
that absolutely superb. Just haven't seen it.
Yes, and I believe they're heading back to France for the next. Well, Gordon's heading back to France for the next one, so it'll be interesting to see what we get there. Right, okay. Now sticking with things that I really like. Favorite cake at a show when you need a bit of a break during the day. Are you ever allowed out from behind the stand?
Yeah, I mean, actually, having done quite a lot of 009 Society Members Days over the years, we've got quite a good experience of the cake trolleys that tend to come around those events. Yeah, coffee and walnut always hits a note for me.
Yeah, anything with icing and a cherry usually.
Excellent. Right, okay. Now, what's the strangest question anybody's asked you at a show?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm not sure if this is actually very strange, but the most frequently and slightly annoying question I used to get asked when we had my narrow gauge layout out at exhibitions was, is this N gauge? Which of course you then have to enter into a discussion about what narrow gauge is, yet they've walked through the doors of a narrow gauge show.
That's a good one, yes. And Stephen?
Yeah, I'm not sure, again, it's strange, but certainly, with the custom etching service, people will come and ask for very, very obscure, often, international plate designs and the assumption that you've heard of everything and you know everything. And it's like, well, we probably can, but we're going to need a bit more information.
Oh, yes, that's a very typical modelers thing, isn't it? It's like you focus on your zone, the thing you're really interested in, and assume everybody else knows just as much about it, which, yes. Okay, and I think the final one is going to be really interesting for you guys. What do you consider the best ready-to-run locomotive ever? And I'm thinking, I'm thinking.
Ever is probably quite a hard question because it's just such a wide field, isn't it? And also, my interest for the last sort of decade or so has really been in kit building. But I'm really encouraged by the kind of the growth in 009 ready to run. I think my personal favourite would be the 4D's Sierra Leone Hunslet, which is my personal favourite locomotive. And even though it's a very kind of premium hand-built model, it's a beautiful model. To see that come to life has been brilliant.
And James is there thinking, what can I rip a chassis out from underneath?
Honestly, Phil, that is the most impossible question you could possibly ask someone who's got as many different interests as I have. I've got Canadian HO, 009, European 009, everything. I think the loco for me that changed my course in modelling was probably the Mini Trains Krauss. I wouldn't say it was my favourite, absolute favourite of all time. But I think if you had to just pick one thing that really, the detail, it was a cute little engine, but that chassis, that's the chassis that started it all for me with the journey on kit design.
Brilliant. That's a really interesting set of answers, that one. Right. Thank you again, guys. It's been really appreciated, and say good luck in the future with the business.